Wealth Attraction Research. WAR, War, the Invisible Hand. Wealth Attraction Research. War, the Invisible Hand. You're listening to Wealth Attraction Research. War, the Invisible Hand, presented by Hakeem Alibokas Alexander on Spreaker, Social Podcasting, and Wisdom, Social Audio Inc., presented for World Reading Club in association with ExercisingYourMind.com and UniquilibriuM. This edition's reading focus comes to us from The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, 1776, The Little Book of Economics, Various Contributors, 2020, and How Money Works, 2017. I'll begin with The Wealth of Nations from Adam Smith, then proceed to The Little Book of Economics, and finally finish off with How Money Works. In that order, because The Wealth of Nations is a little bit more exciting and may be presented a little bit more clearly. The Little Book of Economics, that section, which is called The Invisible Hand of the Market Brings Order, Free Market Economics, is relevant. And then How Money Works, we'll be talking about financial reporting, which is probably the most boring of the three, and even to me, but it's all information that needs to be noted in this entire course of Wealth Attraction Research. This is Chapter 7 of Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, 1776. It is titled, Of the Natural and Market Price of Commodities. Again, in the Little Book of Economics following that it is called The Invisible Hand of the Market Brings Order, Free Market Economics, and finally finishing off with financial reporting in How Money Works. It now begins. Chapter 7, Wealth of Nations, of the natural and market price of commodities. There is in every society or neighborhood an ordinary or average rate both of wages and profits in every different employment of labor and stock. This rate is naturally regulated, as I shall show hereafter, partly by the general circumstances of the society, their riches or poverty, their advancing, stationary, or declining condition, and partly by the particular nature of each employment. There is likewise in every society or neighborhood an ordinary or average rate of rent, which is regulated too, as I shall show hereafter, partly by the general circumstances of the society or neighborhood in which the land is situated, and partly by the natural or improved fertility of the land. These ordinary or average rates may be called the natural rates of wages, profit, and rent, and the time and place in which they commonly prevail. When the price of any commodity is neither more nor less than what is sufficient to pay the rent of the land, the wages of the labor, and the profits of the stock employed in raising, preparing, and bringing it to market, according to their natural rates, the commodity is then sold for what may be called its natural price. The commodity is then sold precisely for what it is worth, or for what it really costs the person who brings it to market. For though in common language what is called the prime cost of any commodity does not comprehend the profit of the person who is to sell it again, yet if he sells it at a price which does not allow him the ordinary rate of profit in his neighborhood, he is evidently a loser by that trade, since by employing his stock in some other way he might have made that profit. His profit, besides, is his revenue, the proper fund of his substance. As, while he is preparing and bringing the goods to market, he advances to his workmen their wages, or their subsistence, so he advances to himself, in the same manner, his own subsistence, which is generally suitable to the profit which he may reasonably expect from the sale of his goods. Unless they yield him this profit, therefore, they do not repay him what they may very properly be said to have really cost him. Though the price, therefore, which leaves him this profit is not always the lowest at which a dealer may sometimes sell his goods, it is the lowest at which he is likely to sell them for any considerable time, at least where there is perfect liberty, or where he may change his trade as often as he pleases. The actual price at which any commodity is commonly sold is called its market price. It may either be above or below or exactly the same with its natural price. The market price of every particular commodity is regulated by the proportion between the quantity which is actually brought to market and the demand of those who are willing to pay the natural price of the commodity, or the whole value of the rent, labor, and profit which must be paid in order to bring it thither. Such people may be called the effectual demanders, and their demand, the effectual demand, since it may be sufficient to effectuate the bringing of the commodity to market. It is different from the absolute demand. A very poor man may be said in some sense to have a demand for a coach and six. He might like to have it, but his demand is not an effectual demand, as the commodity can never be brought to market in order to satisfy it. When the quantity of any commodity which is brought to market falls short of the effectual demand, all those who are willing to pay the whole value of the rent, wages, and profit which must be paid in order to bring it thither, cannot be supplied with the quantity which they want. Rather than want it altogether, some of them will be willing to give more. A competition will immediately begin among them, and the market price will rise more or less above the natural price, according as either the greatness of the deficiency or of the wealth and wanton luxury of the competitors happen to animate more or less the eagerness of the competition. Among competitors of equal wealth and luxury, the same deficiency will generally occasion a more or less eager competition, according as the acquisition of the commodity happens to be of more or less importance to them. Hence, the exorbitant price of the necessaries of life during the blockade of a town or in a famine. Among competitors of equal wealth and luxury, the same deficiency will generally occasion a more or less eager competition, according as the acquisition of the commodity happens to be of more or less importance to them. Hence, the exorbitant price of the necessaries of life during the blockade of a town or in a famine. You know, there's been something happening during the COVID pandemic, right? In which we've heard all these stories about these supply ships and their containers and the loot within them being held up in harbor, right? And not being able to dock or port or offload their wares. And so you have the prices of all kinds of stuff going up. This is what he just said, 1776. Hence the exorbitant price of the necessaries of life during the blockade of a town, right, or the blockade of ports coming into that town, right, or in a famine. Continuing. When the quantity brought to market exceeds the effectual demand, it cannot be all sold to those who are willing to pay the whole value of the rent, wages, and profit, which must be paid in order to bring it thither. So you got to understand what I read before in the sections of division of labor, which you can listen to here on Spreaker and or on Callin, of the component parts of the price of commodities, the division of labor, and all those different things. You'll see why so many things cost the way they do, because of all the things they have to go through, which in their price, once it gets to you, the consumer, is the rent and wages and profit, right? The rent of the land that these things are made on, right? In the factories and stuff like that. The wages paid to the people who labor to make these things, and the profit to the person whose stock or who's the one who owns either the land or the materials that are brought to it, right? That's what all those things are for, if you didn't hear those before. The rent, wages, and profit, which are all things that have to be considered in the price of anything. So, some part must be sold to those who are willing to pay less, and the low price which they give for it must reduce the price of the whole. The market price will sink more or less below the natural price, according as the greatness of the excess increases more or less the competition of the sellers, or according as it happens to be more or less important to them to get immediately rid of the commodity. The same excess in the importation of perishable will occasion a much greater competition than in that of durable commodities, in the importation of oranges, for example, than in that of old iron. When the quantity brought to market is just sufficient to supply the effectual demand and no more, the market price naturally comes to be either exactly or nearly as can be judged of the same with the natural price. The whole quantity upon natural price, market price, right? That means the commodity is sold precisely for what it is worth, right? Going back, the price of any commodity is neither more nor less than what is sufficient to pay the rent of the land, the wages of labor, and the profits of the stock employed in raising, preparing, and bringing it to market according to their natural race. The commodity is then sold for what may be called its natural price, right? That's when all of those things are satisfied, right? That's the natural price. The market price is different. Market is marked up, basically, to keep it simple. So, when the quantity brought to market is just sufficient to supply the effectual demand and no more, the market price naturally comes to be either exactly or as nearly as can be judged of the same with the natural price. The whole quantity upon hand can be disposed of for this price and cannot be disposed of for more. The competition of the different dealers obliges them all to accept of this price, but does not oblige them to accept of less. The quantity of every commodity brought to market naturally suits itself to the effectual demand. It is the interest of all those who employ their land, labor, or stock in bringing any commodity to market that the quantity never should exceed the effectual demand, and it is the interest of all other people that it never should fall short of that demand. If at any time it exceeds the effectual demand, some of the component parts of its price must be paid below their natural rate. If it is rent, the interest of the landlords will immediately prompt them to withdraw a part of their land, and if it is wages or profit, the interest of the laborers in the one case and of their employers in the other will prompt them to withdraw a part of their labor or stock from this employment. Which doesn't happen, by the way, all the time. They would want to, right? So, of course, if it is rent, that the price has to be reduced, right? If at any time, right, the supply exceeds the effectual demand, some of the component parts of its price must be paid below their natural rate. The component parts of price. If it is rent, the interest of the landowners will immediately prompt them to withdraw a part of their land. And if it is wages, right? Wages are what's paid to laborers, people who work, right? Or profit, right, which is paid to the owners of the stock, right? Right, the laborers in the one case and of their employers in the other will prompt them to withdraw part of their labor or stock from this employment. The quantity brought to market will soon be no more than sufficient to supply the effectual demand. All the different parts of its price will rise to their natural rate, and the whole price to its natural price. You know, this is the base of this alchemy of deep physics and high finance that is being talked about in Babylon's Banksters that I'm reading as an adjunct to the wealth attraction research. The book right here is the ultimate spell book, well, at least from what I'm seeing, because it gives exacting details about exactly what's going on. I wonder, was Adam Smith, was he a sorcerer? A lot of people who rail against capitalism have never read this book, and neither have those people who consider themselves to be socialist or communist even read the full Communist Manifesto by Marx, which I have, and also have in my possession here. And it's very interesting how so many will rally and rail and yell and argue about things that they really have no idea about. But I must return to the reading. Continuing, if on the contrary, the quantity brought to market should at any time fall short of the effectual demand, some of the component parts of its price must rise above their natural rate. Right? So if it falls short, if supply falls short of demand, then of course, some of the component parts of its price must rise above their natural rate. If it is rent, the interests of all other landlords will naturally prompt them to prepare more land for the raising of this commodity. If it is wages or profit, the interest of all other laborers and dealers will soon prompt them to employ more labor and stock in preparing and bringing it to market. The quantity brought thither will soon be sufficient to supply the effectual demand. All the different parts of its price will soon sink to their natural rate, and the whole price to its natural price. So this is interesting too, because the one thing that the government wants you to partner with them in when you have a business, right? Some of the things are providing housing, providing jobs, and energy, and food, right? Energy, food, which is energy to people, right? And if you look at this, if the quantity brought to market should anytime fall short of the effectual demand, right? Some of the component parts of its price must rise above their natural rate. If it is rent, the interest of all other landlords will naturally prompt them to prepare more land for the raising of this commodity. Prepare more land for the raising of this commodity, whether that be agriculture to grow things on their plants, trees for wood, or mines for getting iron and other minerals or metals out of it, livestock, all kind of things, right? If it falls short, they have to prepare more land for the raising of this commodity. If it is wages or profit, the interest of all other laborers, right, and dealers will soon prompt them to employ more labor, right, more hiring, and stock in preparing and bringing it to market. And so the stock is the materials that come from the landlord's land, right, which they get paid the rent for, the things that are grown on there. Some of these terms, you got to look at them in a little bit of a different way, but see the connection right where it goes to. It's the land. And this is why those evil sorcerers, so to speak, have created these equations and systems in order to ultimately wrest power over the very physical medium itself, the land, the world, and the labor of the people. The quantity brought thither will soon be sufficient to apply the effectual demand. All the different parts of its price will soon sink to their natural rate, and the whole price to its natural price. The natural price, therefore, is, as it were, the central price, to which the prices of all commodities are continually gravitating. Different accidents may sometimes keep them suspended a good deal above it, and sometimes force them down even somewhat below it. But whatever may be the obstacles which hinder them from settling in this center of repose and continuance, they are constantly tending towards it. Constantly tending toward a natural price. Man. And this is what happens. It gets pulled away from that when you have a central, when you have a oh man. Let me not. I need to continue in this and finish this and go on to the other books, because I'm going to come back to Babylon's banksters later. So the whole quantity of industry annually employed in order to bring any commodity to market naturally suits itself in this manner to the effectual demand. It naturally aims at bringing always that precise quantity thither which may be sufficient to supply, and no more than supply, that demand. But in some employments, the same quantity of industry will in different years produce very different quantities of commodities, while in others it will produce always the same or very nearly the same. The same number of laborers in husbandry will, in different years, produce very different quantities of corn, wine, oil, hops, and etc. But the same number of spinners and weavers will every year produce the same or very nearly the same quantity of linen and woolen cloth. It is only the average produce of the one species of industry which can be suited in any aspect or in any respect to the effectual demand, and as its actual produce is frequently much greater and frequently much less than its average produce, the quantity of the commodities brought to market will sometimes exceed a good deal and sometimes fall short a good deal of the effectual demand. Even though the demand therefore should continue always the same, their market price will be liable to great fluctuations, will sometimes fall a good deal below and sometimes rise a good deal above their natural price. So remember, natural price is basically just paying everybody what they're owed for bringing something to market: the rent, the labor, and the profit through the stocks, right, of those who own the companies, which are basically the organizing force, bringing it together to get these things to market. In other species of industry, the produce of equal quantities of labor being always the same or very nearly the same, it can be more exactly suited to the effectual demand. While that demand continues the same, therefore, the market price of the commodities is likely to do so too, and to be either altogether or, as nearly as can be judged of, the same with the natural price. That the price of linen and woolen cloth is liable neither to such frequent nor to such great variations as the price of corn, every man's experience will inform him. The price of the one species of commodities varies only with the variations in the demand. That of the other varies not only with the variations in the demand, but with the much greater and more frequent variations in the quantity of what is brought to market in order to supply that demand. The occasional and temporary fluctuations in the market price of any commodity fall chiefly upon those parts of its price which resolve themselves into wages and profits. That part which resolves itself into rent is less affected by them. A rent certain in money is not in the least affected by them either in its rate or in its value. A rent which consists either in a certain proportion or in a certain quantity of the rude produce is no doubt affected in its yearly value by all the occasional and temporary fluctuations in the market price of that rude produce, but it is seldom affected by them in its yearly rate. In settling the terms of the lease, the landlord and farmer endeavor, according to their best judgment, to adjust that rate not to the temporary and occasional, but to the average and ordinary price of the produce. That means they try to keep things similar, uniformly priced, no matter what the ups and downs in the markets are going, according to what the natural price may be, because oftentimes the price and cost of things goes up or below, above or below the natural price, in order for them to recoup everything. Such fluctuations affect both the value and the rate, either of wages or of profit, according as the market happens to be either overstocked or understocked with commodities or with labor, with work done, or with work to be done. A public mourning raises the price of black cloth, which, with the market, is almost always understocked upon such occasions, and augments the profits of merchants who possess any considerable quantity of it. Like he's literally talking about black cloth. A public mourning raises the price of black cloth, with which the market is almost always understocked upon such occasions. Well, I don't know about now. I wear nothing but black all the time because I'm always mourning. Monochromatic. A public mourning raises the price of black cloth, with which the market is almost always understocked upon such occasions, and augments the profits of the merchants who possess any considerable quantity of it. It has no effect upon the wages of the weavers. The market is understocked with the commodities, not with labor, with work done, not with work to be done. It raises the wages of journeyman tailors. The market is here understocked with labor. There is an effectual demand for more labor, for more work to be done than can be had. It sinks the price of colored silks and cloths, and thereby reduces the profits of the merchants who have any considerable quantity of them upon hand. It sinks, too, the wages of workmen employed in preparing such commodities, for which all demand is stopped for 6 months, perhaps for a 12-month. The market is here overstocked both with commodities and with labor. But though the market price of every particular commodity is in this manner continually gravitating, if one may say so, towards the natural price, yet sometimes particular accidents, sometimes natural causes, and sometimes particular regulations of police may, in many commodities, keep up the market price for a long time altogether, a good deal above the natural price. When by an increase in the effectual demand, the market price of some particular commodity happens to rise a good deal above the natural price, those who employ their stocks in supplying that market are generally careful to conceal this change. Oh, there's some magic, black magic, or whatever evil magic you want to call it right there. When by an increase in the effectual demand, meaning people want something, the market price of some particular commodity happens to rise a good deal above the natural price, right? Those who employ their stocks in supplying that market are generally careful to conceal this change. When the demand goes up, the price goes up above the natural price. The price, basically, you could even think of natural price as, how do we say that? You buy something, well, in gold and silver we call it buying at the spot price, which means the price that it's just valued all over the world, the same price, like the base price of just the metal itself. Natural price could also be considered like what, without just breaking even. That's what it could be, breaking even for just paying for everything that costs to get it there, right? But by an increase in the effectual demand, right, the market price of some particular commodity happens to rise a good deal above the natural price, right? Those who employ their stocks in supplying the market are generally careful to conceal this change. If it was commonly known, their great profit would tempt so many new rivals to employ their stocks in the same way, that the effectual demand being fully supplied, the market price would soon be reduced to the natural price, and perhaps for some time even below it. Think about that. So when demand is high, the price will naturally go up. But the employers, those who provide the jobs to create these things to market, are generally careful to conceal that change, because if it was commonly known, their great profit would tempt so many new rivals to employ their stocks, like other businesses, in the same way, that the effectual demand being fully supplied, right, the market price would soon be reduced to the natural price, and perhaps sometimes even below it. So the greed steps in, right? If the market is at a great distance from the residence of those who supply it, they may sometimes be able to keep the secret for several years together. Who knows about that now in the age of the internet, right? Remember this book, 1776, this magical tome of alchemical wizardry and high finance and deep physics. Right? If the market is at a great distance from the residence of those who supply it, they may sometimes be able to keep the secret for several years together, and may so long enjoy their extraordinary profits without any new rivals. Secrets of this kind, however, it must be acknowledged, can seldom be long kept, and the extraordinary profit can last very little longer than they are kept. Secrets in manufactures are capable of being longer kept than secrets in trade. A dyer who has found the means of producing a particular color with materials which cost only half the price of those commonly made use of may, with good management, enjoy the advantage of his discovery as long as he lives, and even leave it as a legacy to his posterity. His extraordinary gains arise from the high price which is paid for his private labor. They properly consist in the wages of that labor, but as they are repeated upon every part of his stock, and as their whole amount bears upon that account a regular proportion to it, they are commonly considered as extraordinary profits of stock. Such enhancements of the market price are evidently the effects of particular accidents, of which, however, the operation may sometimes last for many years together. Some natural productions require such a singularity of soil and situation that all the land in a great country which is fit for producing them may not be sufficient to supply the effectual demand. The whole quantity brought to market, therefore, may be disposed of to those who are willing to give more than what is sufficient to pay the rent of the land by which produced them, together with the wages of the labor and the profits of the stock which were employed in preparing and bringing them to market, according to their natural rates. Such commodities may continue for whole centuries together to be sold at this high price, and that part of it which resolves itself into the rent of the land is in this case the part which is generally paid above its natural rate. The rent of the land which you know what, I gotta stop here for a second. You know all that shit that you get online where all these marketers and people are trying to sell you all the secrets to making money or building your business or getting your ideas out there? They are all stuck in this closed system of deep physics and high finance. Some of them may know it, most of them probably don't, with all the garbage that they sell that has no actual effect on anything happening. And they're actually playing into this closed system idea, a control system that seeks to control the very physical medium itself through this alchemical physics that is very intimately connected with finance. Right, which doesn't get anything, which is why so many people follow and read and listen to this stuff and nothing ever happens, right? When they would actually, if they would actually just go to the source of understanding what it is and share this material, that not only would they themselves become enriched in many ways through not only just knowledge, but an actual real value, the value to be able to like exchange value. And the ultimate exchange value being able to exchange their knowledge and their teaching and sharing, right, to exchange it for things that they need, which is basically access, as I'll call it. Access to travel, access to food, clothing, all the basic necessities of life, and even luxuries, if they were to actually be sharing anything that actually mattered. But instead, there's all these empty, useless, based on a system of slavery and control. And I use the word slavery in general of the minds of the alchemical physics that's overtaking so much of the world because they're not connected to the source of what's actually happening and what's going on by selling all these baseless things to people, and that they know themselves don't even have anything to do with reality because they're living a lie, because they're not actually prospering. Continuing, such enhancements of the market price are evidently the effects of particular accidents, of which, however, the operation may sometimes last for many years together. Some natural productions require such a singularity of soil and situation that all the land in a great country, which is fit for producing them, may not be sufficient to supply the effectual demand. The whole quantity brought to market, therefore, may be disposed of to those who are willing to give more than what is sufficient to pay the rent of the land which produced them, together with the wages of the labor and the profits of the stock which were employed in preparing and bringing the market, according to their natural rates. You see, again, one of the hijacks to all this is selling people a bunch of bullshit. People who are going after certain things because of the status of it, and I've talked about this before, like the Nikes and the Prada and all this stuff. Yes, some of you may look good in it and feel like and think that you feel good, and some of it may actually be higher quality than some other things. Usually not, right? And that's not a problem because, again, exchange value is having access to the things that you want, right? But it's things that are wanted, needed, and useful. And the second two, needed and useful, are actually more important in value than things that are just wanted. Because ultimately, want should be attached more to what's useful and also what is needed equally, right? Because we do need travel, we do need leisure, we don't need bullshit brands. Those things aren't anything except for like what you see vanity metrics of people who have a bunch of followers and it amounts to nothing, who are earning nothing from it. Why? Because they're giving zero value to anybody. So people have all these vanity metrics of I've got 5 million followers, but how much are you earning from it in order to have access through the exchange value which you're giving? None. People are paying attention to the likes and followers, right? And not to the actual access, right? Through a certain in access to this physical medium, right? This alchemy, the real true alchemy, the real true magic, right? Of actually offering something of value, exchange value, and use value, right? In order to have access to the things that they want, the real money, which is invisible. So I'm about to, there's the barrier in my own mind, in my own understanding, is slowly breaking through to the understanding of what's happening. And how I've known and felt all along that there must be, you ever had the feeling to yourself why you might be grinding away or doing something of great value or contributing and doing all this, yet you feel stuck, like you're on a hamster wheel in a rat race? But for real, to those of you who are actually creating something of substance, not to the fakers. I'm not talking to you if you're just a faker who just is just putting out bullshit out there and not really anything of substance of value, and all you care about is yourself. That's not who I'm talking to. I'm talking about the people who are not stuck in this purely selfish desire, right? Which is the cause of suffering, according to Buddhism, which plays out to be true in my experience. It's okay to have selfish desire, but not purely selfish desire. Not purely selfish desire, which is probably, I don't know because I haven't read it yet, going to come to light in the invisible hand reading from the little book of economics following this in the same talk here, the same talk and reading. But do you ever have that feeling like you're doing so much and so on and so forth, and that the value of the actual work that you're doing doesn't seem to be paying off? That's because it's been blocked. I'm talking about these things in terms of magic and fantasy because these are actually real things. When it comes to the mind, when it comes to mathematics, and it comes to economy, that's the alchemy and wizardry, the sorcery that is being imposed upon people, that is invisible, that you don't see directly, but is actually causing you physical and material inhibitions in life. But once you start to understand it and know how to continue, like Earl Nightingale said in The Strangest Secret, you don't have to compete. All you have to do is build, work, dream, create. And yes, that might have been sufficient at one time to simply build, work, dream, and create, which I've been doing for a long time. But sometimes it doesn't seem to be paying off. Or we may not know it, but you're actually building up value when you actually are creating, building, working, dreaming, creating, right? But the thing is that there have been blockages put up, like invisible force fields, blockages to the pipeline of because when you start putting things out there, the universe naturally wants to give back to you, like in the so-called law of attraction, right? Right, if you're creating and putting out value, naturally, it has to come back to you somehow. But what happens is that there are barriers being put up that seem to be invisible, that are blocking your pipeline of supply coming back to you, which is natural and normal for you to receive the equivalent of which you're putting out in value to the world. You should very well be able to be creating things of value, and then therefore having access to all the things that you need in the world according to what you are putting out. But that doesn't always happen because there are blocks and checks and things put in the way. But that'll continue to be coming to light as time goes along. But I actually have already seen it and already know it, and I'm already living it, but have blocked myself from it for so long because of this fear of having to always have a secure income, like like having a job at least on the side, even while working my own businesses and being self-employed. But I no longer am under that illusion, or delusion even, as it would. Continuing, Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations. This particular section is called Of the Natural and Market Price of Commodities. A wealth of information, alchemical, magical, however you'd like to call it, or even just practical. The rent of the land, which affords such singular and esteemed productions, like the rent of some vineyards in France of a peculiarly happy soil and situation, bears no regular proportion to the rent of other equally fertile and equally well-cultivated land in its neighborhood. The wage of the labor and the profits of the stock employed in bringing such commodities to market, on the contrary, are seldom out of their natural proportion to those of the other employments of labor and stock in their neighborhood. Such enhancements of the market price are evidently the effect of natural causes which may hinder the effectual demand from ever being fully supplied, and which may continue, therefore, to operate forever. Listen to this part right here. Such enhancements of the market price are evidently the effect of natural causes which may hinder the effectual demand from ever being fully supplied, and which may continue, therefore, to operate forever. A monopoly granted either to an individual or to a trading company has the same effect as a secret in trade or manufactures. The monopolists, by keeping the market constantly understocked, by never fully supplying the effectual demand, sell their commodities much above the natural price and raise their emoluments, whether they consist in wages or profit, greatly above their natural rate. The price of monopoly is upon every occasion the highest which can be got. The natural price, or the price of free competition, on the contrary, is the lowest which can be taken, not upon every occasion indeed, but for any considerable time together. Oh man, how much this ties in with the idea of open physics and closed physics. It is so clear. The monopoly, the monopolizers, right? Listening. It's the monopolist, by keeping the market constantly understocked. That is practicing closed system physics and finance and economy. They're acting as if it's a closed system, as if the supply is limited when it's actually not. They're imposing a limitation on things just in order to raise the price, because they know that by having things in short supply increases the demand for it. And therefore the demand for it, you can raise the price and sell it to those who have the means or in other ways are willing to overextend themselves to get that fucking thing. And this is also a clue into why there's a lot of infighting within this big mafioso situation itself, because when you raise prices of tickets on airlines, like for example during the COVID-19, the heart of it, like when I was in China, when prices of a ticket to go from China to the United States or vice versa was only $400, and then it raised to up to $4,000, a tenfold increase, sometimes more in other cases. And then oftentimes when I would finally get a ticket, then it would be at a good price. Then all of a sudden, for some reason, the flight would get canceled while I was already at the airport, and then therefore couldn't get out of the country. Continuing, the price of monopoly is upon every occasion the highest which can be got. The natural price, or the price of free competition, on the contrary, is the lowest which can be taken, not upon every occasion indeed, but for any considerable time together. The one is upon every occasion the highest which can be squeezed out of the buyers, or which it is supposed they will consent to give. The other is the lowest which the sellers can commonly afford to take, and at the same time continue their business. The exclusive privileges of corporations, statutes of apprenticeship, the exclusive privileges of corporations, statutes of apprenticeship, and all those laws which restrain, in particular employments, the competition to a smaller number than might otherwise go into them, have the same tendency, though in a less degree. They are a sort of enlarged monopolies, and may frequently, for ages together and in whole classes of employments, that shit is so distracting. The exclusive privileges of corporations, statutes of apprenticeship, and all those laws which restrain, in particular employments, the competition to a smaller number than might otherwise go into them, have the same tendency, though in a less degree. They are a sort of enlarged monopolies, and may frequently, for ages together and in whole classes of employments, keep up the market price of particular commodities above the natural price, and maintain both the wages of the labor and of the profits of the stock employed about them somewhat above their natural rate. This brings to mind diamonds, right? Where there are vaults and vaults upon vaults, just stacked to the freaking rims, to the edges with diamonds, by companies like De Beers, for example, keeping the prices of diamonds so high when there's no limit. There's no limit on diamonds. You could give freaking softball-sized diamonds to everybody on Earth if they wanted them. Remember, diamonds have very little use value for most people, except for the bling bling, right? Maybe now in modern times, drill bits and other things that use diamonds, some lasers that make use of their prismatic and other light manipulating properties, right? And different things like that, certain things, shaving, cutting certain things, right? But very little use value for the most part. But they have a high exchange value. Whereas water, which has a very high use value, has very little exchange value. You can buy water for 50 cents, a bottle of standard size, one of those bottles of water. Or just open up your tap, right? Even though that's not suggested by a lot of people. They are a sort of enlarged monopolies, and may frequently, for ages together and in whole classes of employments, keep up the market price of particular commodities, diamonds, above the natural price, diamonds, and maintain both the wages of the labor and of the profits of the stock employed about them somewhat above their natural rate of diamonds. Such enhancements of the market price may last as long as the regulations of police which give occasion to them. Such enhancements of the market price may last as long as the regulations of police which give occasion to them. The market price of any particular commodity, diamonds, though it may continue long above, can seldom continue long below its natural price. Whatever part of it was paid below the natural below the natural rate, the persons whose interest it affected would immediately feel the loss, and would immediately withdraw either so much land, diamond mines, or so much labor, cutting the diamonds, digging them out of the ground, or so much stock, the diamonds itself, from being employed about it, that the quantity brought to market would soon be no more than sufficient to supply the effectual demand. Its market price, therefore, would soon rise to the natural price. This, at least, would be the case where there was a perfect liberty. This would at least would be the case where there was perfect liberty. Would be the case where there was perfect liberty, but it is not the case of perfect liberty. The same statutes of apprenticeship and other corporation laws, indeed, which, when a manufacture is in prosperity, enable the workman to raise his wages a good deal above their natural rate, sometimes oblige him, when it decays, to let them down a good deal below it. But see, this is not what usually happens. They don't usually raise the wages of the laborers. They usually either hire somebody else for the same rate, or if it goes below it, they just fire somebody. As in the one case, they exclude many people from his... Oh, I just said that, right? As in the one case, they may exclude many people from his employment. So in the other, they exclude him from many employments. The effect of such regulations, however, is not near so durable in sinking the workmen's wages below as in raising them above their natural rate. Their operation in the one way may endure for many centuries, but in the other it can last no longer than the lives of some of the workmen who were bred to the business in the time of its prosperity. When they are gone, the number of those who are afterwards educated to the trade will naturally suit itself to the effectual demand. The police must be as violent as that of Indostan or ancient Egypt, where every man was bound by a principle of religion to follow the occupation of his father, and was supposed to commit the most horrid sacrilege if he changed it for another. So, the police must be as violent as that of Indostan or ancient Egypt, which can in any particular employment and for several generations together sink either the wages of labor or the profits of stock below their natural state. That is all I think necessary to be observed at present concerning the deviations, whether occasional or permanent, of the market price of commodities from the natural price. The natural price, let's stop. Police are mentioned several times. Did you see the police must be as violent? It gives you an idea of why such weird things happen in law enforcement and military. That can be extended, law enforcement to military, right? They must be as violent as that of the Indostan or ancient Egypt, where every man was bound by a principle of religion to follow the occupation of his father and was supposed to commit the most horrid sacrilege if he changed it for another, which can in any particular employment and for several generations sink either the wages of labor or the profits of stock below their natural state. This is all I can think necessary to be observed at present concerning the deviations, whether occasional or permanent, of the market price of commodities from the natural price. The natural price itself varies with the natural rate of each of its component parts, of wages, profit, and rent, and in every society this rate varies according to their circumstances, according to their riches or poverty, their advancing, stationary, or declining condition. I shall, in the 4 following chapters, endeavor to explain as fully and distinctly as I can the causes of those different variations. First, I shall endeavor to examine what are the circumstances which naturally determine the rate of wages, and in what manner those circumstances are affected by the riches or poverty, by the advancing, stationary, or declining state of the society. Second, I shall endeavor to show what are the circumstances which naturally determine the rate of profit, and in what manner, too, those circumstances are affected by the like variations in the state of society. Though pecuniary wages and profits are very different in the different employments of labor and stock, yet a certain proportion seems commonly to take place between both the pecuniary wages in all the different employments of labor and the pecuniary profits in all the different employments of stock. This proportion, it will appear hereafter, depends partly upon the nature of the different employments and partly upon the different laws and policy of the society in which they are carried on. But though in many respects dependent upon the laws and policy, this proportion seems to be little affected by the riches or poverty of that society, by its advancing, stationary, or declining condition, but to remain the same, or very nearly the same, in all those different states. I shall, in the third place, endeavor to explain all the different circumstances which regulate this proportion. In the fourth and last place, I shall endeavor to show what are the circumstances which regulate the rent of land, and which either raise or lower the real price of all the different substances which it produces. That is the end of Chapter 7 of Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, 1776, and this edition of Wealth Attraction Research, The Invisible Hand. We'll continue next in a little while in the next installment of Wealth Attraction Research with Chapter 8, The Wages of Labor. But now, I'm going to continue to finish this up and move on to the second book in this installment of Wealth Attraction Research from the Little Book of Economics, which actually talks about something that Adam Smith and the author of the previous book I read has talked about, which is the title of this, The Invisible Hand, in this installment of Wealth Attraction Research. And it is a section in the little book of economics called The Invisible Hand of the Market Brings Order, Free Market Economics. In context, the focus is markets and firms. Key thinker, as I said, Adam Smith, 1723 to 1790, the author of the reading from the previous book. Before 1715, Dutch writer Bernard Mandeville illustrates the unintended consequences that can arise from self-interest. 1755 to 1756, Irish banker Richard Cantillon describes a version of spontaneous order. After 1874, Leon Walras shows how supply and demand lead to a general equilibrium. I believe that's just what I read, right? 1945, Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek argues that market economies produce an efficient order. 1950s, Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu identify conditions under which free markets lead to socially optimal outcomes. According to the Scottish thinker Adam Smith, the West had embarked on a great revolution before the 18th century, with nations changing from agrarian or agricultural societies to commercial ones. During the Middle Ages, towns had developed and they were slowly joined up by roads. People brought goods and fresh produce to the towns, and the markets, with their buying and selling, became a part of life. Scientific innovation produced reliable, agreed-upon units of measurement along with new ways of doing things, and centralized nation-states formed from the mix of principalities that had dotted Europe. People enjoyed a new freedom and had begun to exchange goods for their own personal gain, not merely for that of their overlord. Smith asked how the actions of free individuals could result in an ordered, stable market, where people could make, buy, and sell what they wanted without enormous waste or want. How was this possible without some kind of guiding hand? In his great work of 1776, The Wealth of Nations, he provided the answer. Man, in his freedom, rivalry, and desire for gain, is led by an invisible hand to promote an end, which was no part of his intention. He inadvertently acts on behalf of the wider interest of society. Again, in his great work of 1776, The Wealth of Nations, he provided the answer. Man, in his freedom, rivalry, and desire for gain, is led by an invisible hand to promote an end, which was no part of his intention. He inadvertently acts on behalf of the wider interest of society. Laissez-faire economics. The idea of spontaneous order was not new. It was proposed in 1714 by the Dutch writer Bernard Mandeville in his poem, The Fable of the Bees. This told the story of a beehive that was thriving on the vices, self-interested behavior, of its bees. When the bees became virtuous, no longer acting in their own self-interest, but trying to act for the good of the hive, the beehive collapsed. You know, this is very interesting, because this is basically, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's basically saying that free market capitalism, people looking out for themselves, as he said, that is in man, in his freedom, rivalry, and desire for gain, right, inadvertently acts on behalf of the wider society, wider interests of society, whereas this socialist communist action, where the bee stops acting on a self-interest but trying to act for the good of the hive, the beehive collapsed. Interesting, right? You may not agree with capitalism, free market capitalism, because you think it's the same thing perhaps as crony capitalism or corporate capitalism. Remember, a corporation was originally known as a legal body without a soul, right? But people have been affected in negative ways by that, and also by this dark, evil, black magic and horrible alchemical evil, sorcery and physics over finance and everything like that, which people are affected by and don't understand, which is why people think that capitalism is crazy. But if you look here, at least in this reading, they're saying something completely different. I find it fascinating. Smith's notion of self-interest was not a vicious one. He saw humans as having an inclination to truck and barter, bargain and exchange, and to better themselves. Humans, in this view, were social creatures who act with moral restraint, using fair play in competition. Smith believed that governments should not interfere with commerce, a view that was also held by other Scottish thinkers around him, including the philosopher David Hume. An earlier French writer, Pierre de Bois-Guilbert, used the phrase laissez-faire la nature, leave nature alone, by which he meant leave business alone. The term laissez-faire is used in economics to advocate minimal government. In Smith's view, government did have an important role, supplying defense, justice, and certain public goods that private markets were unlikely to provide, such as roads. Smith's vision was essentially optimistic. The English philosopher Thomas Hobbes had earlier argued that without strong authority, human life would be nasty, brutish, and short. British economist Thomas Malthus looked at the market and predicted mass starvation as a direct result of increased wealth. After Smith, Karl Marx would predict that the market leads to revolution. Smith, however, saw society as perfectly functional and the entire economy as a successful system, an imaginary machine that worked. He mentioned the invisible hand only once in his 5-volume work, but its presence is often felt. Smith described how his system of perfect liberty could have positive outcomes. First, it provides the goods that people want. If demand for a product exceeds its supply, consumers compete with each other to drive the price up. This creates a profit opportunity for producers who compete with each other to supply more of the product. This argument has stood the test of time. In an essay in 1945 titled The Use of Knowledge in Society, the Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek showed how prices respond to individuals' localized knowledge and desires, leading to changes in the amounts demanded and supplied in the market. A central planner, Hayek said, could not hope to gather up so much dispersed information. It is widely believed that communism collapsed in Eastern Europe because central planning failed to deliver the goods that people wanted. Some criticisms of Smith's first point have been raised, such as the fact that the market might only provide the goods that are wanted by the rich. It ignores the desires of the poor. It also responds to harmful desires. The market can feed drug addiction and promote obesity. I'm going to go back to a little highlights here before I continue on in the same book. There's a little picture of Mandeville's beehive. Mandeville's fable of the bees explored the idea that when people act out of self-interest, they benefit the whole society, like the self-interested behavior of bees benefit the hive. This flowchart shows that every individual acts out of self-interest. This might lead to a chaotic mix of products and prices, but that leads to other self-interested people provide competition. They take advantage of each other's greed, which leads to, if one seller charges too much, or if one employer pays wages that are too low, that leads to another will undercut his price, and the first seller's products will fail to sell, or another will take his employees and his firm will fail. right? If one employer pays, so in one case, if one seller charges too much, that might lead to another will undercut his price, and the first seller's products will fail to sell. If one employee pays wages that are too low, another will take his employees, and his firm will fail, which both lead to businesses fail unless they pay market wages and make products the market demands at the price people are willing to pay, which leads to the invisible hand of the market brings order. Free market economics. Quote, consumption is the sole end and purpose of all production. Adam Smith. Fair prices. Second, Smith said that the market system generates prices that are fair. He believed that all goods have a natural price that reflects only the efforts that went into marketing them. He believed that all goods have a natural price that reflects only the efforts that went into making them, which is what I just read from his book in that part. So these readings are lining up quite well as I flow through these books and do tandem readings together of them, which I found is one of the best ways to do them because I learn a lot more by continuing every single day to read in tandem the chapter by chapter and putting them together, even though they might seem to be unrelated. As we can see, this here is directly related to what I just read from Adam Smith just earlier. It's summarizing a lot of it and talking about things in modern times, because of course, like I said, this book was published in 2020, the second edition of it at least. The first one was 2012. But they're still talking about Adam Smith centuries later, 1776. Here we go, because this is still the same things that are going on today. So, second, Smith said that the market system generates prices that are fair. He believed that all goods have a natural price that reflects only the efforts that went into making them. The land used in making a product should earn its natural rent. The capital used in making its manufacture should earn its natural profit. The labor used should earn its natural wage. Market prices and rates of return can differ from their natural levels for periods of time, as might happen in times of scarcity. In that case, opportunities for gain will arise and prices will increase, but only until competition brings new firms into the market and prices fall back to their natural level. If one industry begins to suffer a slump in demand, prices will drop and wages will fall, which means people get fired, right? But as a different, or at least hiring will slow, right? That's if one industry begins to suffer a slump in demand, that if people don't want something in a certain industry, like in the housing industry, like if there's no demand for buying houses, right? Prices will drop, right? Prices will drop and wages will fall. So the prices of homes will drop, and of course the commissions of real estate salespeople will fall, as well as people in contracting and construction and all that, right? Either jobs will be lost or jobs won't be available, right? Prices will drop and wages will fall. But as a different industry rises, it will offer higher wages to attract workers. In the long run, Smith says, market and natural rates will be the same. Modern economists call this equilibrium. Competition is essential if prices are to be fair. Smith attacked the monopolies occurring under the mercantilist system, which demanded that governments should control foreign trade. When there is only one supplier of a good, the firm that supplies it can permanently hold the price above its natural level. Smith said that if there are 20 grocers selling a product, the market is more competitive than if there are just 2. With effective competition and low barriers to entry into a market, which Smith also said was essential, prices tend to be lower. Much of this underlies mainstream economists' views about competition, although dissenters such as Austrian-American economist Joseph Schumpeter would later say that innovation can also lower prices, even where there appears to be little competition. As inventors come forward to provide higher quality products at lower prices, they blow away existing firms in a storm of creative destruction. I like that. A storm of creative destruction. Smith described the ways in which labor, this is a little side note again here. Smith described the ways in which labor, landowners, and capital, here invested in the horses and plow, work together to keep the economic system moving and growing. There's another little sidebar here. It is demand in a market can change for many reasons. As it does so, the market responds by altering supply. This happens spontaneously. There is no need for a guiding hand or plan in the market that encourages competition among self-interested people. So this flow chart shows during a rainy summer, demand for umbrellas soars, whereas demand for sunglasses drops. If demand for umbrellas soars, as prices rise, so do profits. Right? Umbrella firms employ more people and enjoy profits until other firms enter the market, forcing prices back to a natural level. During a rainy summer, demand for sunglasses drops, and as prices drop, so do profits, and self-interested employers let go of staff. This flow chart is interesting. Okay, so on this one hand, during a rainy summer, demand for sunglasses drops. As prices drop, so do profits. Self-interested employers let go of staff. Staff go to work in the booming umbrella business. Umbrella firms employ more people and enjoy profits until other firms enter the market and prices go back to a natural level. But yes, as prices rise, so do profits. And demand for umbrellas soars. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I wish you guys could see this chart. Fair income. Smith also argued that market economies provide incomes that are fair and can be spent on goods in a sustainable circular flow, in which money paid in wages circulates back into the economy when the worker pays for goods, only to be paid back out in wages to repeat the process. Capital invested in production facilities helps increase labor productivity, which means that employers can afford to pay higher wages, and if employers can afford to pay more, they will, because they have to compete with each other for workers. Turning to capital, Smith said that the amount of profit that capital can expect to earn through investments is roughly equal to the rate of interest. This is because employers compete with each other to borrow funds to invest in profitable opportunities. Over time, the rate of profit in any particular field falls as capital accumulates and opportunities for profits are exhausted. Rents gradually rise as incomes rise and more land is used. Smith's realization of the interdependence of land, labor, and capital was a real breakthrough. He noted that workers and landowners tend to consume their incomes while employers are more frugal, investing their savings in capital stock. He saw that wage rates vary depending on different levels of skill, dexterity, and judgment, and that there are two forms of labor, productive, engaged in agriculture or manufacturing, and what he called unproductive, supplying services needed to back up the main work. The highly unequal outcomes of today's market system are a long way from what Smith envisioned. Quote, "There is no art which one government sooner learns of another than that of draining money from the pockets of the people." Adam Smith. "There is no art which one government sooner learns of another than that of draining money from the pockets of the people." Remember, as I've talked about before, rule number one of taxes is your money, not the government. 99.5% of the tax code in the United States is written for us to figure out ways to legally avoid paying them. The highly unequal outcomes of today's market system are a long way from what Smith envisioned. Remember earlier they said that what was a breakthrough that they said? Smith's realization of the interdependence of land, labor, and capital was a real breakthrough, right? That's why they're still mentioning him in books centuries later. He noted that workers and landowners tend to consume their incomes, while employers are more frugal, investing their savings in capital stock. He saw that wage rates vary depending on different levels of skill, dexterity, and judgment, and that there are two forms of labor, productive, which are engaged in agriculture and manufacture, and what he called unproductive, which are supplying services needed to back up the main work. But the highly unequal outcomes of today's market system are a long way from what Smith envisioned. The gap between the rich and the poor. Continuing, economic growth. Smith claimed that the invisible hand itself stimulates economic growth. The source of growth is twofold. One is the efficiencies gained through the division of labor. Smith claimed that the invisible hand itself stimulates economic growth. The source of growth is twofold. One is the efficiencies gained through the division of labor. Economists call this Smithian growth. As more products are produced and consumed, the economy grows and markets grow. As markets grow, there are more opportunities for specialization of work. The second engine of growth is the accumulation of capital, driven by saving and the opportunity for profit. Smith said that growth can be reduced by commercial failures, a lack of resources required to maintain the fixed capital stock, an inadequate money system — there is more growth with paper money than with gold — and a high proportion of unproductive workers. He claimed, oh God, I don't want to even comment on that right now. He claimed that capital is more productive in agriculture than in manufacturing, which is higher than in trade or transportation. Capital is more productive in agriculture than in manufacturing, which is higher than in trade or transportation. Ultimately, the economy will grow until it reaches a wealthy, stationary state. In this, Smith underestimated the role of technology and innovation, the Schumpeterian growth described earlier. Classical legacy. Smith's system was comprehensive. It considered small microeconomic details and the large macroeconomic picture. It looked at situations in both the short and long run, and its analysis was both static, the state of trade, and dynamic, the economy in motion. It looked in detail at the class known as workers, distinguishing entrepreneurs such as farmers and factory owners from suppliers of labor. In essence, it established the parameters for classical economics, which focuses on the factors of production, capital, labor, and land, and their returns. Later, free market theory took a different neoclassical form with general equilibrium theory, which sought to show how a whole economy's prices could reach a state of stable equilibrium. Using mathematics, economists such as Leon Walras and Vilfredo Pareto reframed Smith's claim that the invisible hand would be socially beneficial. Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu showed how free markets do this, but they also showed that the conditions needed were stringent and did not bear much relation to reality. It was not the end of the story. This was not the end of the story. After World War II, the idea of laissez-faire was in hibernation. However, from the 1970s, Keynesian policies, which advocated state intervention in economies, seemed to break down, and laissez-faire enjoyed a strong resurgence. Remember, laissez-faire is the limited government interaction in the markets. Very capitalist, very free market capitalist, as opposed to communist or socialist. The seeds of this flower can be found in works on the market economy by Milton Friedman and the Austrian school, notably Friedrich Hayek, who were skeptical about the good that interfering governments can do and argued that social progress would be attained through unfettered markets, free market. Keynesians, too, recognized the power of markets, but for them, markets needed to be nudged to work best. The free market approach enjoyed an important boost from theories in the 1960s and 1970s based on the role of rationality and rational expectations. Public choice theory, for example, depicts governments as groups of self-seeking individuals who maximize their own interest and extract money without regard to the social good, rent-seeking. New classical macroeconomics uses Smith's assumptions that markets always sort themselves out and adds to the point that people can see the future implications of any government actions and to understand the workings of the economic system so that state interventions will not work. Even so, most economists today believe that the market can fail. They focus on disparities in information held by various participants in the market. Here again is that magic, that alchemy, that black magic they're talking about here. They focus on disparities in information held by various participants in a market. Remember, this is a mainstream book. This is information hidden in plain sight. This is the little book of economics, published by a bunch of academics in England and other places, right? Niall Kishtani, George Abbott, John Farndon, Frank Kennedy, James Medway, Christopher Wallace, Marcus Weeks, to name a few, right? Published by Dorling Kinserly. Found it on the shelves of Barnes & Noble. So, even so, most economists today believe that the market can fail. They focus on disparities in information held by various participants in a market. George Akerlof referred to this in his The Market for Lemons. Behavioral economists have questioned the whole notion of rationality and see the non-rationality of humans as a reason for markets to fail. This is why irrationality is encouraged. This is why education is in collapse and decline. This is why you find things like Common Core mathematics being pushed by people like Bill Gates and others, right, to dumb down everybody. They're pushing the irrationality of humans. The less educated you are, the less you know. And I'm not talking about purely academic education in school, because that's actually some of the worst. That's actually uneducation or de-education, brainwashing, brainstorming, negative brainstorming. The issue of laissez-faire economics divides economists along political lines. Those on the political right embrace laissez-faire. Those from the left align themselves with Keynesian intervention. Interesting. Those on the political right embrace laissez-faire, right, which means more free market capitalism, right? Those from the left align themselves with Keynesian intervention, more towards socialism, communism. This remains a central debate in economics today. The financial crisis of 2007 through 2008 has added fuel to this dispute. The free marketeers felt vindicated in their theories about the business cycle, while Keynesians pointed to market failure. U.S. economist Nouriel Roubini, who predicted the crash, was speaking of those who had distorted Smith's ideas when he said that decades of free market fundamentalism laid the foundation for the meltdown. Yes, he was speaking of those who had distorted Smith's ideas when he said that decades of free market fundamentalism laid the foundation for the meltdown. Exactly what I've been saying before about a lot of these other books, including this one, that they are distortions and that they are watered down versions of what was originally in the original alchemical tome by Adam Smith. That a lot of this stuff is just second-hand, third-hand, just completely diluted information. Once again, U.S. economist Nouriel Roubini, born in 1959, who predicted the crash, was speaking of those who had distorted Smith's ideas when he said that decades of free market fundamentalism laid the foundation for the meltdown. A couple of other side notes here. Localized markets such as this one in Kerala, India, exhibit all the hallmarks of Smith's free market and demonstrate the natural way in which supply and price adjust to demand. Another image here says, Smith didn't foresee the kinds of inequalities that can arise from free markets in their present form. In stock exchanges and money markets, notions of fairness become almost irrelevant. Indeed, indeed. And finally, There's a focus on Adam Smith here, which reads, "The founder of modern economics, Adam Smith, was born in Kirkcaldy, Scotland in 1723. 6 months after his father's death, a reclusive, absent-minded scholar, he went to Glasgow University at the age of 14. Then studied at Oxford University for 6 years before returning to Scotland to take up professorship in logic at Glasgow University. In 1750, he met and became close friends with the philosopher David Hume. In 1764, Smith resigned his post at Glasgow to travel to France as tutor to the Duke of Buccleuch, a Scottish aristocrat. In France, he met the physiocrat group of economists and the philosopher Voltaire, and he began writing The Wealth of Nations. He devoted 10 years to the book before accepting a position as Commissioner of Customs. He died in 1790. Key works, 1759. The Theory of Moral Sentiments, 1762. Lectures on Jurisprudence, 1776. An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. That concludes this part of Wealth Attraction Research, The Invisible Hand, by the reading of the Little Book of Economics. Previously, I read from The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, just mentioned and highlighted, which was chapter 7, titled The Natural and Market Price of Commodities. And now here I move on to the final piece of this, which comes from, and probably is the most boring part, which is why I saved it for last, because people trail off and won't listen to the entire things, and it's fine. But this is also, me being very efficient in things that I feel like I must read and research and study. I'm reading it for me and recording it and broadcasting it so that others may hear it and get some of the references and things like that to do further research for themselves, or maybe have some eureka moments go on as I'm reading. And this is the final reading here. Very good. This is very short. And this comes from How Money Works and is titled Financial Reporting. You've been listening to Wealth Attraction Research, WAR, War, The Invisible Hand. Financial reporting. Financial reporting is when a company publishes statements showing its assets, what it owns, its liabilities, what it owes, and its financial status. This information is used by investors to keep track of the company's progress. How it works. There are legal requirements around financial reporting to ensure that a company gives a full and fair statement of its financial affairs. The company must show its performance over the year or half year, any significant changes to its financial position, and whether it has made money or incurred liabilities or losses during the year. 2 financial reports are usually issued per year, the half-year report and the annual report. For firms that are publicly owned, i.e. their shares are traded on the stock market, the annual report must be made public and freely available for investors to read. Companies usually publish a number of documents: an annual report showing the firm's activities during the year, a balance sheet showing its current assets and liabilities, and the working capital difference between the two. A statement of cash flows and statement of stockholders' equity and financial details on its website for investors. This information is used by investors to keep track of the company's progress. Warning, warning, warning. A balance sheet is a snapshot of a company's financial position on one particular day. Although it is a good guide to the financial health of a company, doctored reports can, and in the past have been used to, hide large debts or liabilities and not reveal them to the auditors who are checking the annual report or balance sheet. Auditors may be alerted to fraud by a number of red flags or warning signs. These could be anything from negative cash flows that miraculously become positive the following year, to sales registered before they have been made, to an unusual rise in gross margins. There's a case study of a balance sheet here, and I'm going to read the descriptions of it here just so I also get these terms in my head. Fixed assets, or non-current assets cannot easily be converted into cash and are usually bought for a long-term use. They are either tangible, such as land, or intangible, such as brand logos. Intangible assets are assets that are not physical, for example, intellectual property or trademarks. They have a value but are distinct from tangible assets such as stock, property, and premises. Current assets include all assets that could be converted into cash, cash reserves within the business, and petty cash, stock, insurance claims, office equipment, and accounts receivable. Debtors. Debtors are individuals or companies that owe the firm money. Debtors will usually have an agreement with their creditors about terms of payment. Creditors. Creditors are the individuals or organizations to which the company owes money. Here, the money must be repaid in the current financial year. It's showing specific creditors. This is a cool balance sheet to look at. It looks complicated, but it's not. Net current assets are current assets after money due to creditors has been deducted. Total assets less current liabilities are all assets that the company owns that are not likely to be exchanged for cash, as well as cash and other liquid assets minus liabilities. Liabilities due are loans, mortgages, or outstanding debt that the company owes and on which it is likely to have to pay interest. Net assets are the company's total assets minus the total liabilities it has. It is the money of value left and is sometimes called shareholders' equity. Issued share cap is the total number of shares held by the company shareholders. Retained profit is profit that has not been paid out as dividends to shareholders and may be reinvested or used to pay debt in the long term. Shareholders' funds, or owner's equity, is the company's remaining net capital. This can be reinvested or paid out annually as a dividend. Symbols for debts and credits. Accountants use a number of different terms and symbols to indicate debts and credits. Some use DR for debits and CR for credits. Others use a plus symbol for debits and a minus symbol for credits. On this balance sheet, brackets are used to show credits, negative numbers. That's what that is. See, look at that. It's good to look at a key. So now I see what that is. Very interesting. There's a whole total assets, less current liabilities. That must be studied later. All right, well, told you the boring and probably the most difficult to understand part was coming at the end. You've been listening to Wealth Attraction Research. There's a lot in this series going into it, including the adjunct or secondary or even supplemental readings and works coming from Joseph P. Farrell's books, specifically Babylon's Banksters, as well as this new one I just got today. You've been listening to Wealth Attraction Research, WAR, War, the Invisible Hand, presented by Hakeem Alibokus Alexander on Spreaker, Social Podcasting, and Wisdom, Social Audio Inc., presented for World Reading Club in association with ExercisingYourMind.com and UniquilibriuM.